She was 25 years old when she met Daniel. Sarah worked at a small-town library and dreamed of traveling the world someday. Daniel seemed perfect from the very first moment, charming, attentive, well-read. He approached her at a coffee shop one Tuesday afternoon, commenting on the book she was reading. The connection felt instant, almost magical. Within 6 months, he proposed with a promise that sounded like something from a fairy tale. "I'll take care of you. We'll build a peaceful life together. No worries, no stress. You'll never have to worry about anything again." Sarah said yes, her eyes filled with happy tears. She believed she had found her soulmate, the person who would make all her dreams come true. The first signs started so subtly that Sarah barely noticed them. Daniel would gently suggest she spend less time with her friends. "My parents are getting older. They need us around more," he'd say with that warm smile of his. Sarah started declining invitations from her girlfriends. Then he began commenting on her clothing choices. "Don't you think that dress is a little too attention-seeking?" he'd ask, his tone concerned rather than angry. Sarah started choosing more conservative outfits. When her best friend Melissa called, Daniel would hover nearby, listening. "Who are you talking to?" he'd ask casually when she hung up. Sarah told herself this was normal. He just loved her, wanted to be close to her. That's what love looked like, right? After they got married, Daniel suggested Sarah quit her job at the library. "You're always so stressed," he said, massaging her shoulders. "Let me take care of everything. You can focus on making our house a home." Sarah hesitated at first. She loved her job, loved being around books and people, but Daniel was persistent, and his arguments made sense. They didn't need the money. She could pursue her hobbies, relax, be happy. So she handed in her resignation letter, telling herself this was the beginning of her peaceful life. Within a year, Sarah's world had shrunk to the size of their suburban house. Daniel managed all the finances. He gave her an allowance for groceries, always reviewing the receipts when he came home. "We need to stick to the budget, honey," he'd say if she spent an extra $10. He insisted they needed only one car, which he drove to work each day. Sarah was left at home, isolated, 3 miles from the nearest bus stop. Her phone was on a family plan that Daniel monitored. When Melissa called less and less frequently, Sarah told herself it was natural people drift apart. She didn't admit that she'd stopped answering because Daniel always wanted to know what they'd talked about, why Melissa had called, what she'd said about him. 2 years into the marriage, Sarah barely recognized herself anymore. She'd stopped wearing makeup because Daniel said natural beauty was more appealing. She'd gained weight because she spent her days at home, cooking and cleaning, with nowhere to go and no one to see. When she suggested getting a part-time job, just to get out of the house, Daniel's face darkened. "Don't you appreciate what I do for you?" he asked, his voice tight. "I work 60 hours a week so you can have this comfortable life, and you want to leave me alone even more?" Sarah apologized immediately, the guilt washing over her. He was right. She was being ungrateful. Daniel never yelled. He never raised his hand. His weapon was far more subtle and infinitely more effective. He made Sarah question her own thoughts, her own feelings, her own reality. When she felt lonely, he reminded her how lucky she was to not have to deal with office politics. When she felt trapped, he told her she was just having a bad day and suggested she reorganize the linen closet to feel productive. When she cried, he held her and whispered that she was too sensitive, too emotional, that she needed to learn to appreciate the peace he'd given her. By year 5, Sarah had stopped crying. She'd stopped feeling much of anything. Her days blended together in an endless routine that Daniel had carefully orchestrated. Monday was laundry day. Tuesday was for deep cleaning the bathrooms. Wednesday was grocery shopping, using the list Daniel had approved. Thursday was for meal prep. Friday was for general housework. Weekends were for spending time with Daniel's parents, who lived just 10 minutes away and expected them for dinner every Saturday and Sunday. Sarah's parents, who lived 2 hours away, rarely saw her anymore. Daniel always had a reason why they couldn't visit. Too much traffic. He had work to catch up on. They'd just been there last month, hadn't they? The isolation was complete, but it had happened so gradually that Sarah couldn't pinpoint when she'd lost herself entirely. She'd stopped reading, even though books had once been her greatest passion. Daniel had opinions about what she read, and it was easier to just not read at all. She'd stopped listening to music because Daniel preferred silence in the house. She'd stopped having opinions about what to watch on television because Daniel would explain, patiently, why her choices were silly or poorly made. She'd become a ghost in her own life, floating through the days, waiting for Daniel to come home and tell her what to think, what to feel, what to do. Year 10 arrived without celebration. Sarah was 35 years old and couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed genuinely. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror one morning, really looking at herself for the first time in years. The woman staring back was unrecognizable. Hollow eyes, tense shoulders, a permanent crease between her eyebrows from anxiety. When had she become so afraid? And what was she afraid of? Daniel never hurt her. He never even raised his voice. He loved her. He took care of her. He'd given her exactly what he'd promised, a peaceful life. But this wasn't peace. This was prison. The thought came unbidden, shocking in its clarity. Sarah gripped the sink, her heart racing. Where had that come from? She tried to push it away, but it persisted, growing louder in her mind. This wasn't peace. This was control. Daniel didn't love her. He owned her. Every aspect of her life was dictated by him. What she wore, what she ate, where she went, who she talked to, what she thought. And he'd done it all with a smile, with gentle words, with the appearance of care and concern. Sarah began to notice things she'd trained herself to ignore. The way Daniel checked her phone every night while she slept. The tracking app she'd discovered on her phone last year that he'd installed for her safety. The fact that he always knew exactly how much money was in her wallet. The cameras he'd installed throughout the house, supposedly for security, but that gave him a view of every room. The way he questioned every minute of her day, requiring a full account of her activities. The way he'd systematically cut her off from every person who might have helped her see the truth. But seeing the truth and doing something about it were two different things. Sarah had no money of her own, no car, no job, no friends left after a decade of pushing them away at Daniel's subtle insistence. Her parents had stopped calling as frequently, hurt by her constant cancellations and excuses. Who would believe her? Daniel was respected in the community. He was charming, successful, the perfect husband to everyone who knew them. And he'd never hit her, never screamed at her. He just loved her so much he wanted to take care of everything. That's what he'd tell people. That's what people would believe. 5 more years passed. Sarah was 40 years old and felt like she was 80. The weight of the invisible chains had become unbearable. She thought about leaving constantly, but couldn't see a way out. Then one day, she collapsed in the kitchen. The panic attack was so severe that Daniel had to take her to the emergency room. The doctor who examined her was a woman in her 50s named Dr. Martinez. She asked Daniel to step out of the room. "Sarah," Dr. Martinez said gently, "your anxiety levels are through the roof. Your blood pressure is dangerously high for someone your age. When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" Sarah couldn't answer. She couldn't remember. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it. Do you feel safe in your home?" The question broke something open inside Sarah. Tears started flowing, and once they started, they wouldn't stop. Dr. Martinez didn't push. She simply handed Sarah tissues and waited. Finally, Sarah whispered, "I haven't felt safe in 15 years, but he's never hurt me. He's never even yelled at me. He just controls everything." Dr. Martinez nodded slowly. "What you're describing is called coercive control. It's a form of domestic abuse that doesn't leave physical marks, but it's just as damaging, sometimes more so. And Sarah, it's not your fault. None of this is your fault." Those words were a lifeline. Dr. Martinez gave Sarah information about resources for women in abusive relationships. She explained that coercive control was about patterns of behavior designed to make someone dependent, to strip away their autonomy and identity. She told Sarah that leaving would be hard, but staying would slowly kill her spirit entirely. Sarah left the hospital with pamphlets hidden in her purse and a phone number memorized in her head. It took 3 more years for Sarah to build up the courage and resources to leave. 3 years of secret planning. She started by reconnecting with Melissa through an email account Daniel didn't know about, accessed only at the public library during her rare approved outings. Melissa, who had never stopped caring despite the years of silence, immediately offered to help. She connected Sarah with a lawyer who specialized in domestic abuse cases. Sarah learned about financial abuse, about gaslighting, about all the tactics Daniel had used to control her for 2 decades. The hardest part was accepting that none of it had been love. The man she'd married 20 years ago had never existed. Daniel had created a persona designed to attract her, to make her feel special and protected. But behind that persona was someone who saw her not as a partner, but as a possession to be managed and controlled. The peaceful life he'd promised was a lie. He'd wanted compliance, not partnership. He'd wanted ownership, not love. On a Tuesday morning, almost exactly 20 years after she'd met Daniel in that coffee shop, Sarah packed a single suitcase while he was at work. She'd opened her own bank account with money she'd slowly accumulated from keeping small amounts of change from grocery shopping over the past year. Melissa was waiting outside in her car. Sarah took one last look at the house that had been her prison for 2 decades. She felt no nostalgia, no second thoughts, only relief. The divorce was ugly. Daniel couldn't comprehend why Sarah was leaving. In his mind, he'd been the perfect husband. He'd provided for her, protected her, made all the hard decisions so she wouldn't have to. He genuinely believed he'd done nothing wrong. That's what made it so insidious. Daniel had controlled her so completely that even he believed his own narrative that it was all for her benefit. The court proceedings revealed the extent of his surveillance and control, the tracking apps, the financial manipulation, the systematic isolation. The judge saw it for what it was: abuse. Sarah moved into a small apartment paid for by Melissa while she got back on her feet. At 43 years old, she had to rebuild her entire life from scratch. She got a job at a bookstore, starting at minimum wage. She reconnected with her parents, who cried when they realized what she'd endured and blamed themselves for not seeing it sooner. She started therapy to work through the trauma of 20 years of psychological abuse. She learned to make decisions again, small ones at first. What to eat for breakfast, what movie to watch, what clothes to buy. Each choice was a tiny act of rebellion, a reclamation of her autonomy. It was